Judy had a really very kind comment, and she said that ISA is the most heart-centered organization in the industry, which I think is just, needless to say, a very nice thing to say. Thank you, Judy. And that's what we try to do. We try to offer as much as we can to as many writers as possible. This past Wednesday, and this is kind of a nice little way to segue into our conversation here, Lee. But on Wednesday, I hosted a webinar for ISA members. It's usually a Connect-only webinar, but it was free for everybody. And I talked about how to utilize this time that we have. I did go a little bit into the state of the industry, but I was leaving it for today's conversation because Lee knows a lot more about it than I do. And one question that I had, which was a really good one, and I'm the first to admit that I'm wrong when I'm wrong, Lee. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one writer asked, what are the opportunities right now for writers during this time? And it was an interesting question because I feel like the opportunities are pretty much the same, but it's just taking longer to get some of the opportunities coming to them, because there is still the need to be looking at contests. There's still the need to be looking at fellowships and submitting to them. There's still the need to be developing your material and craft. So if you're asked that question, what type of nuanced answer beyond that would it be? And am I wrong? Maybe there are fewer, maybe there are more opportunities.
Well, I think first of all, the question is, what are the opportunities for working writers, established writers, and non-established writers? Because I do think those are different. I think before we even dig into that, I think the big thing that has changed is not really the right word, but evolved in an exciting way is the desire for content, right? I think that that's a really important thing for people to look at right now, because we are in a supply and demand society, right? America is founded on capitalism. I'm not saying that is a bad word, just a factual bit of information where supply and demand is one of the ruling principles here. And the one thing that we've seen throughout this period is the growing desire for the product, so the growing demand. Now, does that mean that people are going to be standing on a street corner tomorrow and saying, who has a script? I need to go make a script. Not necessarily. But I do think that being that we're already in a growth period, right? We're already deep in peak TV, that is only going to grow from here, because ultimately the Netflixes and Amazons and Disney Pluses and Apple Plus and whatnot of the world are not concerned only about having the content that we need today, but having the content that we're going to need in 6 months, in 10 months, if there's a recurrence, right?
Right.
Because ultimately they weren't planning for this type of growth. They're loving this kind of growth. And we're seeing it not only here, we're also seeing it in Europe. So today, have the opportunities changed drastically for new writers and working writers? I wouldn't quite go that far, but I think we're in a growth period that for people who are being smart about it, there will be some long-term changes here. I can tell you that on the working writer front, I've seen with my clients, I had a bunch of clients that had deals in negotiation for a while with studios, with networks, that all of a sudden all closed in a week. It was kind of shocking.
Yeah.
Right? Because the feeling in the industry right now is that the one entity that can continue to do creative work undisturbed is writers, right? Be it mini rooms, be it feature writers, like there's no question about how, what's the protocol for writing? You sit down and you write. There's no question of like, what do we do when we go to set?
Yeah.
So I do think there is expectation that there will be more content coming, and I hope that there'll be more content coming in. I think with everything we've seen happen with agencies in the last 6 weeks, and I'm specifically talking about the layoffs and cost-cutting measures that most agencies have engaged in. There are many people who are still very much employed in agencies, but are sitting on collecting 60% of their pay, 70% of their pay, as opposed to 100% of their salary, which, don't get me wrong, it's better than nothing, and I'm not lamenting their experience, but what that means is that the expectation is now that we may have an influx of managers in a few months, right? We may have more junior agents and non-partner level agents coming in and saying, okay, you know, with the agency world, my growth is limited. So I'm going to take it into my own hands as managers do in an entrepreneurial spirit and start building my lists. Will they bring a few?
Explain that term, Lee, real quick. Start building my lists so everybody understands.
A list of clients. So a list of writers that they represent that will help them build their business, right? And I generally love representation and growth period. You know, they're hungry, they're hustling, especially if they come from the agency world. They know what it takes. They understand the industry. They're not, you know, sitting in Iowa and going, should I be a cop or should I be a manager? Okay, fine, I'll go be a manager. They have a real practical understanding of it. So with the way things are going, I would not be surprised if we suddenly see an influx of managers. I know that some of the online pitch companies have seen a lot more willing managers wanting to take those pitches. You know, certainly I've heard managers say things like, well, everybody's home, everybody's reading. I don't know that everybody's reading, because a lot of managers are caught in the headlights suddenly being home with 2 kids that have to be educated. So yeah. As a mom of 2, I can tell you it's interesting.
And I think that's an important point to make, just not, we can keep going on this topic, but even just from the agent that represents our development company, she said that when she's trying to take meetings with people, obviously they all have to be done either over the phone or Zoom or Skype or something. And they're so difficult to continue and follow through with the meetings because they got dogs barking, they have family in the house, they have to be in their home office. So I think for all the writers to hear that, it's important to know that everybody's dealing with this and no one is separate, where we were all having to be stuck at home and having to take these meetings, and it does affect business. So anyway, and I think there's a relatability factor there, you know, that we can see that everybody's human. Anyway, but keep going from that angle of opportunity, because there's a catch-22 with opportunity of more managers taking on and building their lists. And I don't mean to be negative, but the industry still doesn't quite know how or when the production is going to begin again. So they might be able to stockpile projects, but it's difficult to put things into a contractual mode of any deals putting together, correct?
Completely agreed. You know, the big question is, what is production protocol moving forward? When does it get started? How does it get started? That we've seen, you know, proposals on how we bring production back with everything from, you know, movie making summer camp. You know, everybody goes in, everybody gets tested, nobody gets out until the production is over. You know, end of the day, this is how we get it done. I don't know how viable that is, but it's a fun thought. You know, I personally always thought that
they're thinking of needing to sign, and like they're yeah.
I mean, there are conversations about nurses on set. Kind of, you come into set in the morning, first place to go is a nurse's station. You get your temperature check, you get a basic kind of vitals check, and you go on to set. Those conversations are happening, and the one thing that I think it's really, while we don't have the answer to these things, and I don't want anybody to think that I know something I'm not saying, because I can't keep my mouth shut. Hence, I'm telling you everything I know. There isn't some, you know, plan already in place. It's certainly something that is going to have to continue to be explored until we have a vaccine, right? Once we have a vaccine, back to business, because we have a solution, right? We have a cure. But up until that point, certainly there are questions about protocols, but I can tell you that, you know, we really haven't seen anything yet about fall TV season pushing to winter. And that's a big bulk of money for television if they decide to do that. I have a friend who is helming a studio feature. They were supposed to start rolling in June. Right now they're talking about August. You know, so I do know that those conversations are happening. I think the important thing is to remember that the opportunities that this will generate will be more long-term, right? As opposed to immediate, let's make this movie really fast. I do think that one of the things we are anticipating is a mad grab for resources once we do get back, once we know what that looks like, because we will have lost a chunk of our annual film and television production, right? So whether it ends up being 25% or 33% or whatever it is based on the number of months that we are not producing, a lot of companies, a lot of entities will want to make up ground, and there just won't be, you know, a third more of locations, a third more of crew to go back to work. So the good news for crew is that even though right now we are deep in famine, right? Crew got cut. The moment we stopped production, we lost, within a week, 120,000 jobs just on the cast and crew front. There will be a period where I can't anticipate a lot of production hands will be sitting home. And I do think it may be advantageous for film crews, more so than TV crews that can go project to project to project as opposed to have to commit to one big one. So I agree that because we don't know the parameters on production just yet, we don't know what it looks like and how opportunity pans out. But I do think that, coming, through peak TV, we're not over peak TV, we're going into another growth period.
I don't know how to check these numbers, and maybe you know them because I love how much of a numbers person you are, but there's a question that came in through the Q&A. It's a good question. How are the well, it's kind of a two-sided question. How are the film releases doing with this new premiere at home option?
Ultimately, we saw a number of titles go VOD fast, right? We saw Invisible Man, we saw Trolls World Tour, we saw a few others kind of shift immediately. With something like Invisible Man, you want to make the most that you can of enthusiasm for the movie in the moment, being that it had only premiered a couple weeks before. It was tracking well, it was well reviewed. But we're actually seeing studios now holding off and holding strong to the commitment to release their films in movie theaters. So Warner Brothers just came out with a statement about Wonder Woman and I think one or two other movies. Disney, I know, has, Mulan was set with some premiere dates that got pushed. I know that we are not, for example, practically speaking, we're not finishing film for theatrical screening in the same velocity as we were before, because everybody's waiting to see what the theatrical release schedule is going to be like. Because for these movies to recoup money, we very much need theatrical. VOD is not going to deliver the same impact for this type of a movie. It's not going to be a drop in the bucket.
They need both revenue streams. You can't just rely.
Yeah, absolutely. But effectively,
yeah,
you need theatrical to become the marketing for VOD. When you release VOD, there's a reason why we don't see a lot of day and date releases, right? Those releases that drop at home and in the movie theater all at the same time. One promotes the other. And so I do think that at this point, most studios have not veered yet from their initial strategy, especially for these big summer numbers, to go theatrical first. That said, we are seeing interesting things on Netflix, for example. In the beginning of March, first 2 weeks of March, the most watched program on Netflix was a movie. It wasn't a TV show. It was Mark Wahlberg's Spencer Confidential. So ultimately, we're seeing that there is a lot of play there as well. But those are movies that are made with a specific financial expectation that is going to be different than what a studio takes on when they do Wonder Woman or when they do Mulan or whatnot.
So obviously we can't predict the future, even though we try to do this on a daily basis.
Sadly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought though, in terms of, yes, entities, we'll say studios, production companies, whatever, the industry in general would be looking to get into high gear in terms of producing more content once all of this hopefully normalizes. At the same time, doesn't that maybe mean that we won't be sitting in front of movie theaters screens and TV screens? So will there be less of a need to do that? No, you think regardless, they're going to be releasing this?
Well, I think that ultimately, because we don't have a vaccine for COVID-19, because we are looking long-term at, getting through summer, going into fall, winter, flu season, there is talk on very high levels that we can see, now that we've curtailed this outbreak, let's be clear, we are still on the way up.
Yeah.
We are going to potentially see another outbreak. I think people are going to be more hesitant. I think older people will definitely be a little bit more conservative about the way they participate. There's conversations about opening movie theaters at 50% capacity. So even when you go to the movies, they're only admitting half the people that they used to for any particular screening. I don't anticipate they'll double the amount of movie theaters that are available to screen. So that means that content will have to be relied on elsewhere. And ultimately, I think that with this period, there will be more of a retraction to home, more of an ongoing desire for people to play it safe. Not everybody, but if you have 20% of the population playing it safer than they used to, that's a bump in viewership.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we got a question from Linda Frothingham, and Linda, we'll get you in a second. And if you wanted to ask the question verbally, we can get you on there. Just raise your hand in the attendees list. As you were answering that question, Lee, in my mind, I had a couple little spots to touch on. One, could this whole situation create new forms of content, new ways to present content? But then my brain went back to, well, Quibi didn't exactly nail it. So can you talk to everybody?
Thank you for not making me say that. I was like, just don't be the idiot who's like, let's talk about Quibi. So you did it and I didn't, so thank you.
Yeah.
But with Quibi, I mean, we do have to talk about timing.
Right.
Quibi is offering 10-minute increments of content on your mobile device, specifically your phone.
Yeah.
This is meant for people on the go. I mean, not to be an a-hole about it, but who is on the go?
Right.
We're all sitting at home and trying to find things that will eat up our time, not leave us wanting more in 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway.
And it's too bad. I mean, it was a good idea, I mean, I don't mean to speak ill toward Quibi. I think it's a great idea. I think any new form of potential, ways to deliver content, I think is great. Take the chance. From that level, though, should writers still just be focusing on TV features? Now, the problem with wanting to write for TV, that old adage of you need to be in LA to be a TV writer, that still is going to be the same and probably remain the same. But how does someone in Barcelona go, well, I want to write for TV, and try to reach out to people to have them read?
Somebody buys a plane ticket to Los Angeles once we're flying again and gets over here. Listen, I do think that for the immediate, and I'm talking about the next 3 months. I'm not talking about a year from now. I think in the next 3 months, writers who are in TV will have a little bit more freedom as far as location, simply because most rooms are going to be Zoom driven, or using collaboration tools like Writers Room Pro, that really it doesn't matter where you are. For example, I work with a writer who is in Seattle, who lives in Seattle or homes in Seattle, and commutes down to Los Angeles to work in a mini room for one of the streamers. Her life has only been easier since all of this happened, since their mini room is still happening. But in general, I think other than this window of 3 months of like, you decide to go to Thailand for this period, like great, log in from Thailand. We don't really care. I do think that we will go back, or try to go back, to the more tactile and personal behavior of everybody being in a room, face-to-face interacting. I do think there's something that happens there that's really great. I do think that what's happening on Zoom right now, and the fact that everybody, love it or hate it, is forced to figure it out. Writers who are writing features not in LA, I think their life just got easier.
Yeah. And that's, I think, really great news. It doesn't necessarily mean there is any, what's the word I'm looking for? Lack of focus on generating amazing material. It means
absolutely.
We still need to write something amazing and still get it out there, but it is really good news that this is opening up the possibilities of taking more meetings and at least getting in front of people. Linda, let's go to you here.
Hi, Linda. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. Actually, I've been working with a lot of different writers, and the questions come up about whether we should be limiting our scenes or the amount of crowds, or having less close contact, so that the things that we're writing can be more producible if things don't open up as well as we'd like them to.
I think it's a good and valid question. I think that this is a great time to look at models like Searching. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that movie. It's a great John Cho movie that's really about a man who is going through his daughter's online and social history to figure out where she is in one night as he tries to locate her. And it's done really well, and it's a really contained piece. And I think we'll be looking for some of these contained pieces coming out. In the long run, I'm not quite sold yet on we have to change the way that we tell stories, because ultimately entertainment in time of difficulty is leaned upon for escapism. So with that in mind, I don't know that we will be looking for on-screen reminders of the difficulties of the moment. And that means I don't know. I don't have a way to determine this. What I will say, and what I am saying, is that the last few days I've been talking to 3 writers that I work with. One is a showrunner. Two are also TV writers who are working on features. They're all working on material right now with studio executives' involvements, with studio network executive. And both of them, or all 3 of them, are working on very large scale projects with very large scenes, lots of people, some set pieces, there's a chase scene. Not once did I hear from any of them, well, now that we're in this time, I have to cut it. They're being directed to continue on the material as it was intended before all this happened, and have not, thus far, none of my people have been directed to adjust material to the new normal.
Okay.
That's great.
Well,
Thank you, Linda. It's a good question, because we've thought about that too in terms of the ISA and particular pieces of material. I think in general, one location, small cast, if you can keep your budget down, it all depends on the project and the genre. I would just try to write to the story first and foremost.
Totally.
And let's not try to write too much to the industry right now. In a way, it's like what Lee and I have spoken about in the past and in other interviews is try not to write toward trends. Right now, we have a huge trend, but we don't know how long it's going to be. It's just like any trend. So I think we just have to focus on story. I think it's great to hear that those studios are working on big pictures.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is a larger question, which is what is the entertainment going to be seeking after this, right? What as it resets moving forward with content, what are we looking for? We do have belief that this will have affected the way that the fall lineup looks whenever we find out what that fall lineup looks like, because upfronts, all but CBS's upfronts have been postponed indefinitely until such time as networks are comfortable committing to their lineups. But I think the expectation is you're going to see a lot more comedy, you're going to see a lot more escapism, you're going to see a lot more wish fulfillment. We're going to see less grounded dramas, because we're all living a grounded drama at the moment. I'm not saying those are going to go away entirely, and I'm not saying that we can't go dark on content, because I think there'll be a desire for that as well. But I think that you have to look back at the Great Depression and what we put up in movie theaters at that time. Mind you, we're not doing musicals in the same way anymore. But I think that the key word here is escapism.
Yeah. I think entertainment in general is escapism, and now we need it more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go. Joe Beatty has a question. I'll just read this. I think it's a good one. Joe asks, some people are saying the lockdown will increase the influence of Netflix. Do you agree? Will they be more powerful or not after normalizing happens?
It's a good question. I don't think we know yet. We have HBO Max that's coming into the game on May 27th. Disney is buying a ton of content and building up content. I think that right now we are too deep in the soup to see what it all can pan out like. I'm finding it alarming that services like Netflix and Amazon are starting to send me emails about, find your favorite movies to spend your time with this, during these difficult days. What about this movie from 20 years ago? They're not doing this because they think I love this movie from 20 years ago. They're doing this because they're afraid that I'm going to go somewhere else. They're afraid that they don't have enough of my content, right? What I'm looking for. And that's what they're all grappling for right now. I think, Netflix was already super dominant. The depth of their content and what they've built over the last few years has been completely unmatched. What they continue to roll out is completely unmatched. I talked to a friend who's a Netflix exec earlier in the week, and he was like, the numbers, we didn't know there's so many low-hanging fruit, but we guess it's still there. Because they just brought on 15 million more subscribers and are growing in Europe and growing in Asia. So I do think they'll remain dominant. I think that where they'll look to grow their prestige factor is going to be on features. They haven't been quite as successful as Amazon on the feature front, even though now they have had some Academy Award nominations, which is what they were going for. But they didn't have the buzz of The Big Sick and Manchester by the Sea. They're working on that. There's a new Chris Hemsworth movie. It's coming out with them, I believe, this weekend or next Tuesday. So they are trying to assert their dominance not only on TV, but also on features. I think there's still a lot of questions in terms of Apple TV, Apple TV Plus, the new content they're putting together over there. Matt Chernis is a really, really smart man, and he's been handed the reins of gathering all of this, and I'm sure that he has a few things up his sleeve. I know that HBO has had a ton of things that they've announced that are not going to be rolling out on May 27th, but hopefully not long after. Amazon is still waiting to roll out its Lord of the Rings Hobbit thing. There's a lot coming on a lot of fronts. Yeah. So it still remains to be seen.
Well, I'm excited about Lord of the Rings. I don't know about anybody else, but so I have like 2 or 3 questions that rattled through my head there, and we've got some questions coming in through the Q&A. Let's hit a question that I know you get a lot, Lee, and really this is even regardless of the current pandemic situation. But now that we have this situation going on, and because there is this slow build to more opportunity for writers, what should writers consider before they consider cold outreach to representation? What should the questions be that they ask themselves before they actually go, okay, I'm going to email this person?
You always, first of all, you want to take a step back, and you want to, as a writer, to consider who you're approaching and what you're looking for in a rep, right? So if you think, gosh, I really want a rep that has a ton of time for me, that answers my call, every time I call, I get a call back that day, the next day, they're always on their email. Well, you probably don't want to sign with Aaron Kaplan, right? Huge guy, amazing, but has huge showrunners. Oh, is also exec producing 5 shows, by the way. But just a super busy guy. You're not going to be high on that manager's list. So if you're looking for somebody that will hustle and maybe take risks that more established managers, who frankly don't have to do it anymore, won't, then consider working with somebody who is still in a building mode, still building their list, building a reputation, rather than somebody who's super established, who will say like, yeah, I mean, I love your work. I'll give you notes. Ultimately, I'm not going to go knock on doors where I think nobody's going to open. And I think that a lot of times for writers breaking in, and this is where my opinion is kind of coming into it a little bit, it's advantageous to be at a similar spot career-wise as their manager, because then both entities have something to gain. Right? If the manager has something to gain from the writer's success and the writer has something to gain from the manager's success, then I think that there is a good marriage there. About a year ago, a client of mine had a pilot that was going around town that was getting pitched everywhere. The feedback was great, didn't get any offers until it looked like Netflix was going to buy. Right? And the pitch went up at Netflix, and the word on the street was like offers coming after the weekend, and everybody was really pleased with themselves. And after the weekend, suddenly it all went away. This was after writers fired their agent. So this writer's agent, who's a high power TV agent, was no longer able to help. So the manager, who had a lot of success in features, but not a lot in TV, suddenly picked up the ball and started setting up all these crazy pitches where, the writer's going like, why am I pitching over here? And we ultimately talked about, why is the manager doing this? And the conclusion that we got to was the manager never set up a show of this magnitude up until this moment. So after the writer, the manager has the most to gain. And that's how the show ended up at HBO Max.
So the manager just kind of took some chances in a way and said, let's just try to get you in front of as many people as possible.
Yeah, picked up the ball and kept rolling and rolling and rolling, because I think, and I know the manager, we didn't have this conversation, but I also know how strategic he is. I wouldn't be surprised if he looked at it and went, wow, I'm really close. I haven't been close on something of this magnitude, of this, kind of prestige level. This is as close as I've gotten. I have to take it further. And I mean, I can tell you that some of the calls that came in for pitch meetings were like, eh? And they led to the right thing. So clearly he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
But there were calls that I think for many other more successful reps who don't need that success would have been like, it could happen, it could not, but I have the 17 other shows that are already set up.
Right.
Doesn't happen on to the next. And here you had somebody whose agenda as the manager was aligned with the agenda of the writer.
So now that's one point, right? That's one thing to consider. There are probably about 6 or 7 others that would take up the entire webinar. I think one point that you and I make equally to our writers, whether it's separately or at the same time, is that we've got to figure out ways for other people to say yes to our material in some way before we start reaching out to people to consider that material.
Absolutely.
So what do you tell your writers who come to you who haven't yet had something produced, et cetera, and they're like, I want representation, what do I do?
So the first step, if ultimately you wrote the script, you wrote it, in a class, or you wrote it with your writers group and everybody's loved it, great. Get it onto another set of eyes. Get it to people who don't know you, who don't feel that, they're rooting for you, so they'll naturally give you some breaks in a certain area. Go to people that will be deliberately hard on you. You don't have to agree with their opinion, but those are ultimately the people that you have to at least consider trying to win over. Melissa Hilfers, who is a very successful feature writer and TV writer, who's based in New York, she and I had a chat one day, and she was kind of going off on this tangent. And she said, like, you got to find the negative Nellies. Like, that's what you do as a writer. Find the negative Nellies and get them to love you. That's your job. And while it is extreme, and Melissa is a freaking machine, I could not love her more. And she produces at a ridiculous rate and is incredibly successful because of it. She is a working writer who works with readers and works with the people that will really challenge her on the craft. So, if somebody, Max, for example, develops something with you, I will always say, get it to another set of eyes. I don't develop a lot of content because this is not what I signed up for. But I have a client that I do develop with closely, and it's mostly my legacy clients who are now working writers. We developed an outline for something that we really labored over, and the writer did a lot of work. And as soon as he was like, can I go to pages? I was like, no. We need to get somebody else to look at the outline. I need to know that we're in line with it, because there is a loss of objectivity. So you need to get people that have some ability to take a step back, look at the work, and really assess it and tell you how it is, whose opinions you trust. It's really important to trust the opinion of the person you're talking to. If it's Joe Schmo off the street who, loves Valley Girl and that's his ideal movie, not saying it's a bad movie, but I'm just saying if it's his or her Godfather, we're going to have some words. You have to make sure that they agree with you on what is good, what is not good, so that you can really consider the notes. But yeah, you got to vet the work before you get it out there, because while material gets out there and gets rejected all the time, and then writers go out and write the next thing, you want to know that you put the best version of the thing out there and you don't have a second chance to do it. You can do it with contests for sure, but with managers and executives, they're not going to, when you reach out to them and say, well, I sent you this thing 8 months ago and you passed on it, but I've since done some rewrites, unless they were so intrigued by the log line, they're not looking at it again.
Yeah. It's what is the concept, and have you found success elsewhere? Those are the two primary things I think that will get someone intrigued enough to read the material and consider the material. There are a whole bunch of other things. I mean, we could do a whole class on just cold outreach in general and what to be considering.
Totally, 100%.
I also just want to mention that Lee has a website. You should go to leejessup.com. The blog is awesome, and you can just subscribe to that and you get it every week. And I read your State of the Industry as much as I can.
Thank you.
Much less all.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to get a new post out about representation during this time and what writers can and can't do.
Yeah, and so Lee is the person to work with. Why? Like when should writers come to you? Obviously, anytime. But what should they be considering when before considering working with you?
Generally, writers come to work with me when they want to look at their career pursuit as opposed to a script they're writing, right? And there's nothing wrong with sitting down and writing a script, right? But that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to really help build up the writer, starting and building into a screenwriting career, which is a much longer plan. There are going to be multiple scripts, if not many scripts along the way. So generally people come to work with me when they think about approaching this and just want to know everything, right? Want to have the information about how to work smart, how to learn from those who came before them. I think one of the benefits of working with me is that I just bring a lot of institutional knowledge with me of many writers who've done this many different ways. There are very few stories that I hear these days about somebody breaking in or somebody failing to break in that surprise me, right? That catch me off guard. Other writers come to me when they feel stumped, when they feel stuck, when they feel like they've been trying it on their own for a while. They don't want to just bring on a writing partner to have somebody to be accountable to. They need somebody to help them along on this. And the reality is that ultimately building a writing career is a very long and very challenging marathon. And much like athletes training for marathons, you need people helping you on. Ultimately, architects need mentors and chefs need support and whatnot. So the people that come to me are the people that are looking for help because they want to do it in the long run and they understand there's no kind of quick fix to a screenwriting career.
Yeah, I use this metaphor a few times. It's probably getting old, even though it's only maybe 2 weeks old. But when you're looking at competitive sports and athletes, they have practice sessions and then a game day, and writers, it's hard to differentiate between practice and game day because every day's game day in some ways.
Yeah, but they're also studying film. They're also studying other athletes. They're learning all the time. I think there's a really important component of succeeding in writing, and that's the learning of it, right? And by learning, I don't necessarily mean going and sitting in a class and having an instructor guide you to your best pilot or screenplay, even though that is certainly part of learning. But there's also the understanding of what's happening in the industry. I mean, I can tell you that I've talked to a lot of writers over the years who've come to me and said, I wrote a feature and I want to sell it for $500,000. And I will have to then have a conversation with them and hold on. Do you know what's the state of our spec market? Do you know what our spec sales are going for? Do you know how many we're selling? Do you know who's selling? Do you know what's moving in the industry right now? Knowing all of that is critical for the success of a writer, because that should inform the decisions and expectation that a writer has moving forward.
Yeah, expectation is huge, and expectation it's finding a balance between hopefulness and knowing. Like I'm trying not to be negative, but there you need to have a level of understanding of really how the industry works, and a lot of the questions that are coming through are kind of in that vein. So let's dive into that. And Lewis, I'm going to put Lewis on audio here. He can ask this question.
Hello, thank you for all this good information.
Of course.
I'm working on a project of which we think that the BBC will be interested in because it is an adaptation of an author who has been featured in radio dramatizations in the past. Can you give us any idea, or do you have any idea of the status of BBC as you have related the status of Netflix and the like in their looking for scripts currently, or are they on hold as well? Can you address BBC, as well as finding how to find a manager who has worked with BBC before?
So as we know, BBC has, kind of mastership or mothership BBC, and then it has BBC America, BBC Canada. We have a few different arms of the BBC. The BBC, for some, will become another buyer on the buying tour, right? When you go and pitch to buyers. But if you're specifically looking to sell something to the BBC that is UK native, then it's really about knowing executives there and having a path into them. Tends to be difficult on that level to go and pitch directly to the studio or network unless you know somebody in there or you have a manager that will bring you in. I do know that they're looking at material. I don't know that they're buying aggressively, because I don't know anybody's buying aggressively right now until, like Max said, everybody will figure out when we can actually make these things. But I do know that they are looking at content. I do know that they've taken some Zoom pitches and teleconference pitches. But you would have to know an executive within, because studios and networks protect themselves because they're very large businesses. And because of that, they don't tend to be very friendly to, you know, people who, much like in the mafia, they don't know. So they have to have somebody vouch for you, and that usually will be a manager. It can be a lawyer with a relationship there, or obviously an agent. You know, you have to assume that at least some managers stateside will have some path in to BBC, or at least BBC America. But you might want to look at UK-based agents. They don't have managers, literary managers in the capacity that we do in the UK. But you might want to look at some BBC literary agents who may be more well-equipped to approach the BBC if they have those internal relationships.
Thank you.
Great. Wow, good answer. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Louis. There are a couple questions here. They're not exactly the same, but it's in the vein of different content, short form content, maybe new paradigms coming along in terms of the delivery of content. Charlotte Barnes asks, what about folks who want to write a web series? Is anything happening with those? Let's just pause on the answer for that. And then Christy is asking, what do you think of the possibility of an audience choosing the next scene, and then the next scene, kind of like the, oh, I'm forgetting the Netflix show.
Name Your Own Adventure.
Name Your Own Adventure situation. So new forms of mediums and ways we consume the content. Are we seeing any stuff coming out there?
So here's the thing. I mean, both web series and Name Your Own Adventure. I mean, I have a friend who is a big content creator who was making it back in 2012. Right. So we've seen, and we saw the Netflix movie that was more of a, I can't remember the name of it. It's escaping me at the moment.
I can't remember it either. It starts with a B, like boxer fish or something.
Yeah, exactly. That one.
Anyway.
Bandersnatch.
Yeah, I think it is.
Bandersnatch?
I don't know.
Bandersnatch. Okay, who was it? Somebody just mentioned it, so thank you.
Yeah.
So we have seen those happen. I mean, ultimately, the interesting thing about Quibi, not to go back to Quibi, is that ultimately what they are doing is high-end web series, right? If we look at the traditional format. And those we've had around for a very long time. They're doing the high-end version of it with very big people, with episodes that are 10 minutes instead of 3 or 4 or 7. But Issa Rae came from web series, right? She had Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. Web series have been leading the path for a long time. The challenge with web series is, how do you find them these days, right? The internet is so incredibly saturated, it's harder and harder to find them. The nice thing about web series, much like shorts, is that hopefully they can be done with a smaller crew, and therefore the accessibility to makeability is a little bit better than a full-fledged feature right now. What I like about web series and what I like about shorts is that it puts the power of the making, or it allows access to the writer or director or whomever to really take on the making of it and put together a crew. And I think that's a really great learning experience. It's important to note that web series are very writer-friendly. Shorts tend to be seen as more of a director's vehicle. You know, this is content that has been going on for a decade now. So I think the question today with a web series is not whether or not to make it, it's how do you make it great, and how will people find it?
That's kind of going along the lines of Matt's question.
So yeah, a couple of years ago, I made a short film just to try to attempt to get more people to hear my voice. As we all know, it's very difficult to get people to read anything. It's slightly easier to get someone to watch a short film, although not always that easy. But I did make the film. I'm really happy with it. My first directorial duties there, and it's been accepted to over 20 festivals and counting. It didn't make it to like the really big ones, but it's done well. It's gotten a bunch of nominations. It's gotten some awards. It's been screening for a year now, and my hope when making this film was maybe it can get me to a place where I can get people to read more of my writing. But beyond the festivals themselves, I haven't been able to really leverage the film. So I was wondering, is there other possibilities, or should I just sort of rest on the fact that I made a really good film?
Did you also direct the film?
I did.
Great. So I think that ultimately, yes, festivals are the way to go, but you also can look at an online release strategy. There are different platforms for different genres, and see if there's a natural home for your short. Ultimately, it's hard to find a standalone home for a short because we're not releasing them the way that we do movie, and they're not searched out in the same way that movies are. But I would look at online release strategy, and I would look at how to build on it. If nothing else, it stands as a conversation starter when you send in material, certainly a link when you send in material to show what you can make, what it looks like, the level of excellence that you're delivering. If it looks great and if it's emotionally powerful, then ultimately I think people will want to see what you write beyond it.
Yeah.
Do you recommend, let's say I'm sending out some queries, especially cold queries, which is basically my only choice, including a link to the film? I mean, will anyone watch it, or will they see that as pushy?
I think you definitely include a link to the film. You don't include a script, but you tell them about the short film that you wrote and directed, where it played, any notable awards. You now have a new screenplay or TV pilot. Here's the log line. If they want to view your short, here's a link to it. Yeah, you definitely. I think there's absolutely definitely value in it as long as it's great.
It's great.
We'll believe you, Matt. I
Yeah,
think.
listen,
Go ahead.
it's really important to believe that you challenged yourself to excellence, because that's what the industry gets inspired by. So if you have something that you feel really strongly about, then yeah, you absolutely want to include the link.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Matt. And to kind of continue along the lines of that topic, Sizzles can be a really great way to at least get people interested in a particular project along with the pitch. We have found that the ISA has produced a couple Sizzles for projects that we're trying to get out around town. And if we let them know, oh, by the way, we did a little 2.5-3 minute video of this, they'll be like, yeah, sure, we'll watch it. Granted, this is not only through a cold outreach. It's more of, are you willing to take a look at material? If it's a yes, what kind of material? And then we're like, great, we have this kind of stuff. Okay, cool, send that over. And then we're like, here's a sizzle. So it's more like the third time we're in communication sometimes. It really is very relative to the person you're reaching out to. There is a Justin that has a good topic.
While we wait for Justin, can I just shout out to my buddy Christy Dick, who is on this, who's just made me so happy, letting me know that she'll be on, because I love her so much and she's such a talented writer and amazing person and remarkable cook. So just a little shout out to Christy.
Hi, Christy. All right, cool. Justin, you're on. Go for it.
Hi, yes. Hi, Lee. How are you doing?
I'm good, Justin. How are you?
I'm great. Okay, so I wanted to first, before I say this, just for everybody in the room, to just kind of think about what I'm about to say, and don't take anything I say as offensive or anything. It's really in perspective of being a Black writer. Just wanted to throw that out there now. So basically, what my question was, is that I'll just read what I said. I think everyone can acknowledge that there is still an imbalance of people of color as the lead actor in film and television. As a new screenwriter that is Black, would I be smarter to create both content that is multicultural and all Black cast to appease the major production companies and have a chance of getting in the door? It just appears sometimes extremely successful Black lead scripts only make it when the Black lead is surrounded by predominantly white characters, i.e. like Scandal or the How to Get Away with Murders, or we are on the big screen as slaves or having a quote-unquote white savior. And when I say that, as far as with the big screen, if you just going through the individuals, when you think about the people that have actually won Oscars and things like that over the years that are Black actors, they are either, it is held within them being a slave, or that they are supported by a white cast, if that makes sense. Hopefully all of that. Would you suggest that you kind of have to play the game as a Black writer to kind of get into the door?
So ultimately, there's something that you said that I have to go back to. You asked what you should do to appease the production companies. My general rule of thumb is don't appease anybody.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'm a little bit of a rebel in that, but write the stories that you see and the cast that you see and the things that speak to you. I
Absolutely.
completely acknowledge everything you're saying, but I also have to look at something like Moonlight, right? That won Best Picture. And believe that those things are changing, and they're changing because of a hunger to see more diverse point of view. There's certain types of scripts, and I'll try to stay as PC as I can about this. I don't mean to offend anybody if I do. There's certain scripts that I read that are going to be a repetitive point of view that I've seen 17,000 times already. And I've had
Absolutely.
conversations with writers where I'm like, do I really need another one of these stories about another one of these characters from that same point? Like,
Absolutely.
enough. I think there are really interesting things that are happening in film and television right now. And I think you should absolutely lean into that. I think that the good news is that Hollywood
Right.
is recognizing the desperate need to diversify. And suddenly we are seeing shows like Vida that are about a completely, is there a white character in that show? I don't think so. Which we're seeing these more diverse, more well-rounded shows
Right.
that represent, from that to Insecure to Pose to the list goes on and
Right.
on. More diverse characters. Hopefully we'll diversify in film faster and better, but I think we're definitely doing it. I think Moonlight was an important moment. I think even Parasite was an important moment for movies, in that the best movie in Hollywood for this past year was made in Korea.
Right.
I think that's just a fascinating reality. So we're seeing more diversification, right? I mean, I don't sound like a cliche. It's going to sound like a cliche, so bear with me, but write your truth. Don't
Absolutely.
apologize.
If you don't mind, if I can elaborate on that, of what I meant by that, because I think as a Black writer, I think, and maybe there's others that are on here that are Black screenwriters as well that can kind of agree with what I'm saying, that when you aspire to do things within the world, sometimes you have to play a certain role or play a certain game to at least get yourself into the door to then put out your actual, what you stand for as an individual. And you're absolutely right when you say that you really should stand for what you believe in and put out the things that you want to put out. But I know a lot of people also that when they stick to it so heavy that they just never push through the door. You get what I'm saying? So I think it's almost like the question is that I would like from a white person's standpoint of just being 100% blunt about it and saying, absolutely, if that's what, because at this point we do see what's going on.
Mhm.
So the question is, if I do what I ask, as far as saying, if I put on the front saying, look, I have multicultural scripts, as well as all Black cast too, just to give a blend of everything, would that be the best route to at least have people to view what you're writing? Because sometimes you end up getting stuck into, and not saying that this isn't a good route to go, sometimes you end up having to do the BETs or doing Netflix, which is great, don't get me wrong,
Hey, BT
but
is doing 20s right now.
absolutely, but at the same time you're going against all Black screenwriters. You get what I'm saying? So, and it's unfortunate, because I think a lot of the majority of the white community would like to see things that we do on BET as well. And I don't think that that it's blended on BET, that everybody that it's white, Black, or Asian, or everybody is watching that channel. I think it is very geared. So I think it's like I would like to be able to be well-rounded, that everybody would want to see my work. I would want to be on other networks than that. So the question is, what do you do to get featured on all networks, if that makes
I mean,
sense?
okay, but here's the thing. Like we mentioned 20s. Let's look at Lena Waithe, right? She started on a Netflix show. She went to a Showtime show that was hers. Then she did a Spielberg movie.
Hmm.
And now she's on BET, right? So you do different things for different times and different people.
Understand.
I think that as long as your stories are universal, as long as thematically they, you know, for years, people that are not white have been asked to connect to white stories, right?
Hmm.
And I think that the ability, whenever it was successful, was because the themes and the experiences were universal and universally accessible. I don't think it's too much to ask of white audiences now to adapt to experiences or to access experiences that are not, they're not necessarily of a particular white person's experience, but I
Right.
do think it's a time for diversity. And I think it's a time for where there is genuine interest in differing points of view. And I think that what you can do, while there's clearly not enough visibility for filmmakers of color, right, television writers of color, certainly, I think this is the time to write your stories as it serves the story first and foremost,
Hmm.
with a cast that serves the story best, and set aside worries about executives, because here's the thing, this is a city of a million opinions.
Absolutely.
And you know, young executives will tell you different things than older executives, much like, you know, I had a battle between two writers in a room. One was a younger younger writer, a young Latino writer, who was talking about a Latino character that was put up to effectively get killed, and saying, like, can we not do that? And the older writer, who wasn't Latino, was like, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm giving work to a Latino actor here.
Hmm.
Why wouldn't I do that? I'm trying to include more diversity on the screen. So it's different points of view at different times.
Yeah,
And
and
I
let me
think
add,
that it's just,
Lee, just because we're running a little short on time, Justin, thank you for a good question, because it's worthwhile to talk about this. I do know personally, and I'm sure Lee is had this experience too, that the swing toward more diverse writers throughout the industry is definitely on the up. And I've also heard that 40-year-old white males are having a more difficult time finding work. And so there is that swing. And I think the primary answer here that Lee is hitting on is an important one, that because of your voice, that is how you're going to be recognized and noticed. Starting a pitch with, I write multicultural projects as well as all Black projects, that may not be there. The person considering the email, considering the pitch, etc., is going to assume most of that because of who you are, because of the material you're writing, and because your angle and voice and perspective. That really ultimately is more important than just the generality of, I try to create a multicultural, universe within my stories. I hope that makes sense. Let's jump into a couple questions here. Both, Lee, they're both kind of contest related in a little bit. Devin is asking, is this a good time to be entering contests? How reliable of a way is this to get representation, even if you place highly without winning at the top spot? This is a huge answer. So we'll try to get to the specifics, because there's one more question we want to jump on.
Yes, it's a good time to enter. It's always a good time to enter. The industry is always looking for the next generation of writers. You want to enter a high profile contest, much like an ISA contest. There's a number of other ones out there. I know we have some deadlines coming up. Nickel, Austin, Tracking Board, Page deadline already passed. Final Draft has their deadline in the summer. Yes, it's valuable to enter. With most of these, you really have to become a finalist or a winner to be able to make the most of it. And then it's up to you to take it and run with it and try to make the most of it in order to really capitalize on the win. I think the one mistake that I've seen writers make, and I just talked to a writer who won a big contest, not ISA's contest or Final Draft, who was like, well, they said that all these things would happen, but then nothing happened. And so I'm still hoping that something will happen, but it'll be months, or it's been months. And here's the thing, like the organizer, as much as the ISA does and much as Final Draft does, should fight to do what they can for their winners. But I think that there's also the component of taking the win and making the most of it that you can, and using it to open doors for yourself as opposed to waiting for them to open.
Yes, I think that's the key there in terms of how do you use the wins, and how do you present yourself as this person who has done this or that. And the next question from Dan is along the same lines. You know, Dan's saying, I want your perspective on how valuable or not or invaluable are the accolades and laurels for mid and lower tier screenwriting competitions.
I think that if it's not an industry known competition, it can be great for you to see, 500 scripts go in, where does yours land? I think there's absolutely value to that. I think the confusion happens when writers come in and say, I just won the Schenectady screenwriting contest, nothing against Schenectady, and I don't know if they have a screenwriting contest. It's going to open every door where the industry is going to go, huh? Who? What? Who judged? Like, why should it matter to us? So I think it's really important to understand the value of each content or of each contest that you enter. And just because the value may be different from contest to contest, just because one can show you that, okay, in a pool of 500 scripts, my one script is doing really well, I should now take it to the next level, that doesn't invalidate it. But it's not going to get you the same visibility as going to the industry and saying, I became a finalist for the nickel, right? It's just not the same value. And so you have to understand where that competition falls and have clarity about what you'll be able to gain from it. I often see emails from writers who will tell me, I have the script and I just won, all these massive screenwriting contests, and I'll go down the list and I know some of the names, but they're not what is considered massive screenwriting contest. My friend Jewel Ross, who actually reps Barry Jenkins, talked to me about this a long time ago when I interviewed him for a book. And his thing was like, listen, I went to Yale, but not because of its location. I went because it's the best school. And I want the writers that win the best contest. And I understand that. It's a blunt way to put it, but I think it's incredibly true.
Yeah. And I think another angle with the middle to lower tier, which really isn't in any way a negative way of saying it. It's just they get fewer submissions. They're not as well known around the industry. One way to take that angle, like you were saying, Lee, was that it's a way to test the material. Because if you write one script, it's your first script, you may have done 2 drafts, and you submit that to Nickel as the first contest that you submit to, you should just take your $50 somewhere else. Unless you are a gifted screenwriter. And even then, how do you know if you're a gifted screenwriter? Don't test out your material through Nickel, because it's the lottery. You can test it out through some of the smaller contests. On the other side of things, there was a writer that we ended up helping, this was years ago, because he kept posting on our site his success stories. And I ended up seeing that he had won or placed very highly in like 40 some odd screenplay contests. I hadn't really heard of any of them, but I was like, I guess I should read the script, so it at least was like, well, somebody else is saying yes to it. So that's another way to use the lower and mid-level contest, just a way to test it out. Don't start with the big ones if you're just beginning to this process of screenwriting. Anything you want to add here, Lee, that we didn't touch on in terms of the industry? What should we be aware of right now? I mean, we went through quite a bit of stuff, but anything we didn't touch on?
Gosh. I mean, I actually think it's, while this is an uncomfortable pause for a lot of people, and I understand that, I think it's a really exciting time. And I think that it's building up to what can be a real, an even bigger golden age for the entertainment industry. So, it's funny. Once in a while, a client of mine will jump on a call with me and say, like, tell me something positive. It's so difficult. I don't want to get depressed. And I actually think there's a ton to be positive about. I think it is time to be strategic. I think it is time to also remember that a lot of people that perhaps failed in another industry that they weren't emotionally invested in are now coming into screenwriting and saying, you know what, if I'm going to fail at that, I might as well try for the thing I really love.
Right.
So, which I think is a valid point. But I really think it's about making the most of what you have going for you, really kind of continuing to work smart and strategic, because the industry is still very much here, and there may be momentary delays, timely delays that are difficult and frustrating and scary, but fellowships are going to go on, competitions are going to go on, shows are going to continue to get made, because, you know, there is demand for the product. And we are an industry where we're a country that survives on supply and demand. You know, you have to look at it. You have to look at California, that has the 5th largest GDP in the United States, or in the world. I'm sorry, first in the United States, fifth in the world. A lot of it has to do with entertainment. It has to do with technology. It has to do with aerospace. It also has to do with entertainment. So I think that the fears of the industry as a whole going away, that's not going to happen. I think there may be changes in the way that we consume content. It may be a lot more small screen than big screen for a little bit, but I'm sure then the big screen is going to come back. I think there's a lot of support from studios and filmmakers to ensure that big screen continues to have a loyalty to it and visibility, and it's not going to go kind of quietly into that good night.
Drive-through,
but I think there's a lot that's
theaters
happening.
have shown a resurgence. You know, like I saw a comment in there about drive-through movie theaters. So people want to consume this stuff, and
Oh yeah,
we're not going anywhere.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for attending this, and you know, we're going to be doing this basically every Friday, unless we have a third Thursdays event. Maybe not always with Lee, although we would be happy to. That would be a lot of work. I just wanted to announce, anybody who wants an education in screenwriting for a really low price, for $59, you can take our online course called The Craft Course. You can go to thecraftcourse.com and put the code in Keep Writing CC. I'm just going to do that here. Keep Writing CC. Craftcourse.com, Keep Writing CC, and we're going to keep that $40 discount going for probably a while here. We want writers to be working on their material. We want you to be developing as much as you can. Most importantly, and you know, me, of course, my title being Director of Education, we have to put an emphasis on education. And obviously these events that we have here with the whole staff, and of course bringing Lee on, this is about education. Even though we're not necessarily educating ourselves about the craft, we are working on what do I know about the world right now, and how can I plan? And this is all part of your process. This is all part of the practice sessions before you get to your game day writing sessions during the week. So you can go to thecraftcourse.com, Keep Writing CC, it's $59. You keep it for life. If you're a TV writer, if you're a feature writer, there's no expiration on the thing. Lee, thank you so much. It's leejessup.com. And
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
We're going to see you again, I'm sure. You're a regular guest on as many of our events.
Can't get rid of me.